Oh, what a day it is, and welcome to My Manic Brain. I am Jonathan Morris Schwartz, and this is the My Manic Brain Sex, Politics, and Everlasting Life program. It is available on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, Jonathan Morris Schwartz. It is audio podcast available on iTunes, Spotify, and Podbean, and my every other day newsletter is free on Substack, so feel free to enjoy it. Today's show, we're going to focus on communication and how it's changed over the years and millennia, from back in the caveman days when the only communication was person to person, caveman to cavewoman. Occasionally they'd write on a rock, they'd grunt, gesture, point, say a few words, all the way through the telephone, the smartphone, texting, and finally where we are now, which is the social media, digital age, and how we communicate with each other and the world. I want to share that I had a moment where I remember around 2000, 2002, when people had crossed over from using their phones to call and talk to people, and texting crossed over from maybe 50% of our communication to where it is now, which is for some people effectively 100% of their communication. And I remember feeling this strange sense of excitement to some degree, but also a pang, a heart pang of loss. I am a speech language pathologist and have studied communication and how we speak and how we gesture and point and the meaning of vocal tone and prosody and inflection, the difference between written communication and verbal communication, and how our written form of communicating with others is oftentimes misinterpreted. We all know that texts and emails in both a personal and work environment are oftentimes misinterpreted. There are myriad of examples of people who have lost friendships and families and lovers and relationships because their email or their text was misinterpreted as being evil or poor intentioned, when the truth is it was really meant to be well intentioned. Today's program, we will navigate through yesterday's newsletter entitled "Oh, How I Miss My Phone in a Bag" on Substack, which goes a little bit further into this melancholy over old-fashioned communication and coming to grips with the fact that we communicate oftentimes in 144 characters or in a sentence or a phrase, and we've lost something because of it. So without further ado, I remember that dreadful feeling the day I realized texting killed communication the way I knew it. I loved seeing someone's eyes, hearing their voice, making a point with a silly anecdote, flirting, giggling, singing, waving my arms around, pointing, squinting an eye just enough to make it clear I was being cynical, or raising an eyebrow as if to say, crazy, right? There is no one living born before 1876, which is when the telephone was invented. So even centenarians grew up with at least three forms of human-to-human communication. Person to person, face to face, whereas the listener and the speaker use all five of their senses to discern each other's tone, intent, arm, hand, facial gestures, level of sarcasm, sense of seriousness, and ability to correct any perceived or actual misconceptions in real time. Number two, handwritten note or letter, when for the cost of a stamp, you could send as many words as could fit on the page. And number three, voice-to-voice communication via the telephone. Over the past couple decades, we have, through social media, emails, and texting, lost several important dimensions of effective and meaningful communication. When communicating in person, verbally on the phone and on video, we have a fighting chance to mean what we say and say what we mean. A facial gesture, a wink, a smirk, a blush can clue the listener in on our true intent, but in person, a gentle touch or leaning in closer to one's face can soften a misinterpreted moment. Emails and texts lack the dimensionality and texture that allows for many communicative messages to be accurately interpreted. We're now on the second generation of young folks who don't use their phone as a phone and oftentimes communicate monumentally important and valuable moments like marriage proposals, breakups, deaths, births, job offerings, terminations, and medical test results by text message. Many people are notified when they test positive for COVID-19 by text or via an app. Kind of reminds me of the joke about the man whose friend agreed to watch his cat and his elderly mother while he went on vacation. He calls his friend while on holiday and asks how his cat is doing. His friend said his cat was dead. The man said, "Oh my God, why did you spring that on me so quickly, so unexpectedly?" And the friend asks, "Well, how did you want me to tell you?" He said, "You should have started out slowly by saying the cat got loose and then scampered onto the roof, and you climbed after her, but sadly she jumped off the roof and died." And his friend said, "Okay." The man then asked, "How's my mother?" And his friend said, "She's on the roof." That's what it's all about, effectively, straight to the point or not. The text message stole the long story. Most texts are a couple of sentences at most, and in the early days of texting, the technology was new enough that a decent percentage of texts were never delivered. In the early 2000s, it wasn't uncommon for someone to ask if their text was received at all. Now, effectively 100% are indeed received. If you go on a Tinder date and you don't receive a text back, you've been ghosted. We've also developed an odd sense of how much time should elapse before responding to a text. There's nothing worse than texting a sensitive question or unnecessary comment only to have it answered or clarified the minute you hit send. An example of how communication can be misinterpreted to detrimental effect is an email, for example, that says, "Are you ever going to stop the craziness? You're driving me nuts." It's difficult to interpret this email as anything other than hostile, but in truth, the writer sent it in jest and was giggling like a teenager after they sent it. So instead of, "Are you ever going to stop the craziness? You're driving me nuts," it was, "Are you ever going to stop the craziness? You're driving me nuts." So you only know the difference with the tone, inflection of the voice, and the ability to interpret it when you hear it. Reading it, your mind is predisposed to interpret it one way or the other, oftentimes in a manner that is detrimental. When the person received this particular email and received it in a negative manner, responded, "I'm tired of your selfish, egotistical bullshit." Well, the sender was shocked because their intentions were good and responded back, "Look who's talking. You're the one prancing around the office showing off your $10,000 Rolex. Look in the frickin' mirror, asshole." So it started as, "You're going to stop being so crazy, you're nuts," in sort of a frolicking way, expecting that person who sent the original email expected a response. "Yeah, la, 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 you're crazy, I'm crazy, let's go get a beer, or let's go have fun, or let's go bring our kids to the museum or the theme park," ended up irreparably damaging their relationship. And so those two friends or employees or whoever exchanged that particular email never spoke again, or never were able to regain the type of communication that they could have had if they originally had simply talked to each other. How many emails and texts are misunderstood? How many parents, children, friends, husbands, wives, siblings, colleagues, and acquaintances send a well-intentioned email or text that is misperceived as hostile? How many potential, wonderful, lifelong relationships and marriages are destroyed because of miscommunication in this impersonal digital age? How many human connections could be salvaged, repaired, or saved by insisting on sitting on a park bench and seeing, feeling, and touching someone? How many people never get the opportunity to say, I didn't mean it the way you took it? Effective communication oftentimes requires context. The written word is brilliant and important, but too often it is insufficient. Sometimes when someone texts, I've had enough of this, it means back off, but sometimes it means I've had enough of this texting and miss your cute smile and want to see you in person. Give people the benefit of the doubt. You can always say straight up, did you mean that email or text to come off as hostile because I'm interpreting that way? If I am wrong, please accept my apology. That kind of clarification response is much better than jumping to a conclusion. Your gut may be correct or it may not be. You may end up salvaging a relationship with someone who you could end up losing over a miscommunication. Sometimes we are our own worst enemy. We typecast everyone. We like for things to make sense. Remember in middle school when you were figuring out who you were, your identity, your personality, your speech pattern, your gait, whether you were going to be a tough guy or a preppy or an intellectual or an artist? Remember how you might slip from one persona to another based on peer pressure or the influence of the cool crowd or the girl or boy you thought might let you kiss them if you behaved in a manner which excited them? Remember when you did not know who you are now? Remember when you had no opinion of your own? Remember when you were defined entirely by others? Is it still true? It was communication that saved you many times. When you hurt someone's feelings and they cried, you didn't run to a typewriter and pluck out a sentence on a piece of paper and hand it to them. You talked, confronted, cried with them, apologized, laughed, gestured, hugged. How many times have you laid awake at night stewing, torturing yourself over what someone claims someone else said about you? How many times have you confronted someone about what they said and they deny it believably? Technology has provided miraculous advances despite breeding jealousy, envy, and depression. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok do connect us and provide a platform to reconnect and share and celebrate talent and success. Texting is convenient. Knowing there are dozens or hundreds of thousands of people out there who actually swipe left when they see our airbrushed, photoshopped high school picture is exhilarating. But damn it, part of me would love for our smartphones to lose all their smarts and do what my 1992 5-pound clunky phone in a bag did. Let me think I was the coolest guy in town because I was calling my friend from his driveway. We all know that communication, miscommunication, poor communication can lead to injustice. We have modern injustice, false arrest, false imprisonment, violent crime, racial injustice. We have historical injustice, mob rule, posses, vigilante justice. Strangely and perversely, modern technology is in some ways both a blessing and a curse. The blessing part of modern technology, clearly DNA, video cameras, facial voice recognition, modern forensics, solve crimes that in past decades and centuries would have gone unsolved. The curse part of modern technology is the unfettered, uncentered social media platforms in some ways bring us back to those potential mobs, gangs, vigilante justice because of the power. Before I get into what I'm calling Twitter and Facebook and modern posses, gangs, mobs, and vigilantes, I want to be clear on a couple things. This particular chapter from my book, which is available on Amazon.com, My Manic Brain, Sex, Politics, and Everlasting Life, as I tie in this particular chapter into this program on communication and the effects thereof, I want to be clear. This leads to an opinion where I was pretty categorical about feeling that these social media platforms had to accept some liability. Unlike a utility like a phone line where we used to pay, those who have phone lines still do pay, $15, $20, $25 a month to effectively lease the phone line. And generally on the phone, we spoke to one other person. And the phone company was not responsible for whether somebody planned a crime on the phone or said something terrible or lied. The speech was free, it was uncensored, and the telephone company was immune from it. And that's the law that Congress and Senate, I believe it's a 232 law that they're talking about, which provides liability protection to social platforms like Facebook and Twitter and treats them to an extent like a utility. Of course, the difference is that Facebook and Twitter don't charge a monthly fee. We are the product. From the social dilemma, we all saw that. And they make infinitely more money by effectively, I say this kindly, spying on us and tailor-fitting our feed with advertisements than they would charging $5 or $10 a month for us to treat it like a utility. But what I'm about to get into does categorically state that I believe we should land on some liability, but I did want to add a little bit of nuance to that. And the catch-22 is, and where I have some sympathy for Facebook and Twitter, is that it's impossible for them to adequately, objectively censor the material that goes out to the millions and billions of people on their platforms. There's no way that they could effectively decide what is hate speech, what is inflammatory, what is a lie, what is not a lie. They're now in this somewhat of a mushy middle ground where, Twitter and Facebook are trying to haphazardly and in an unpredictable manner censor and tweak their algorithm to keep certain voices. But heterodox thinking, people who think outside the box, people who have opinions that may be politically incorrect, don't necessarily have opinions that create the same volatility as someone who is lying, for example, about a pedophile ring in a pizza place. There's a difference. And finding a balance is extremely difficult. The only possible solutions is maybe there can be some sort of national federal board of some kind with lefties and righties, with conservatives on one end that's comprised of conservatives and liberals that come up with certain standards that at least there's an attempt at objectivity, an attempt at reducing outright censorship and subjectivity. Maybe schools need to inject into their curriculums some way of teaching from the kindergartners up through high school how to be critical thinkers, how to disbelieve what they read, how to be dubious, how to not swallow whole every post, as real as it may appear. So with that injection of nuance, to be fair, here we go. We all remember those old westerns where one angry cowboy would show up in the center of town and stand on a soapbox and start screaming, "We all know who raped and killed Mrs. Jones. We all know darn well." Then a crowd from the community would gather and start listening to the angry man. Are we going to stand for this injustice? Are we going to let him get away with raping and murdering our women? And someone in the crowd, of course, would shout, "No!" You could tell from their facial expressions that some of the crowd had no way of knowing what the heck this man was talking about or whether a rape or murder had even been committed, but his passion was contagious. If the sheriff ain't going to deliver justice for Mrs. Jones, who will? And as if on cue, the crowd chants, "We will." And before you know it, an innocent man is harmed or lynched or shot by a crowd who sincerely believes that they are delivering justice for Mrs. Jones, for whom nothing may have happened. Before the mass reach of social media, the only way to incite riots and vigilante murder was to have private gatherings in basements with whoever was brave or foolish enough to show up. There was no way to engage or incite anyone who did not show up in person. Law enforcement might not know where they are, but once they infiltrated, they always knew how many were involved by simply counting them. Social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook offer those wishing to cultivate modern posses, gangs, mobs, and vigilantes the ability to reach millions, even billions of quote unquote town folks without any accountability and without authorities being able to find them in a single basement. There is no effective feedback mechanism. We've been conditioned for generations to believe the news. And Twitter and Facebook present very authentic looking posts. If Walter Cronkite back in the day had reported on national television during one of his broadcasts that there was a pedophile ring in a pizza parlor, you know darn well an angry mob would have tried to burn it down right after stealing the pizza. Social media has empowered every wacko and conspiratorial theorist with a quote-unquote Walter Cronkite-sized megaphone. We have handed the asylum to the inmates. Yes, the First Amendment is critical to our democracy, but let us not conflate free speech with unchecked hate-mongering. Almost all 7 or 8 billion people on Earth have access to the internet. Anyone who uses its utility must be held accountable for fomenting dangerous lies. The truth does matter. If we continue to allow unfettered, politically or criminally blasphemous posts to run rampant, the mentally unstable among us will believe it. And if they sincerely believe injustices are occurring when they are outright lies, can we blame them for reacting even violently? If you believe someone's going to harm your family or loved one, wouldn't you defend them? Unchecked fabrications and lies on social media are the equivalent of telling a mama's boy his mother sucks dick. He's going to kill you whether his mother placed his mouth on the penis or not. We must hold social media giants accountable. Their reach is too large, and they are profiting or invading our privacy while selling us beanbag chairs and earwax removal products. They're invading our privacy, listening and analyzing our words, and manipulating our impulses. At a minimum, they should be held financially accountable for posts containing lies, slander, and incendiary material, particularly if it incites violence or death. The owners of these platforms are worthy of so many billions of dollars, are worth so many billions of dollars, they could literally pay out $1 billion a month in damages and still never be able to spend their money, even if they tried. I do want to clarify, as I did before, there could be a point where if we were to take away the liability protection of Facebook and Twitter, it could very well mean that they run out of money. I mean, I want to be fair. If everyone who claims that they've been lied about sues and wins damages, that's a problem. Perhaps it's one that they deserve. That's up for debate and comment. Enough is enough. Regulate social media, make them accountable. Justice means ensuring that truth prevails. Twitter and Facebook should not have it both ways, allowing incendiary lies to pervade and make billions while doing it. If someone gets hurt or suffers damages from a pernicious lie on their platform, they must be held financially liable. Only then will they take responsibility for their content, as they should. Again, at the time I wrote that, if I was forced at gunpoint to be categorical, I would still most likely land there, because I can't. I've listened to myriad of discussions on this, and it all boils down to either one single human being, either Zuckerberg or Dorsey or a group of people around him, deciding whose voices get magnified and whose don't. And then my brain starts to weave toward, well, this is a capitalist society. Are they a monopoly? Should they be broken up? If we break them up, what do we lose? Are people going to be disappointed in the loss of that central global community? Of course, how else are we going to allow competition if they are indeed a monopoly? I'm not going to pretend to have the answer, but what's happening now is really hard to sustain. And if it is sustained where there's this haphazard sense of censorship, and anyone who doesn't fit whatever the perhaps subconscious desire to have a certain type of politics or message of a particular platform, there's going to be a First Amendment issue. I mean, our Constitution will not be followed. We will lose our right to free speech. And let's not diminish that loss. It is people who have unpopular speech that have made this country the country it is. We just have to look at the civil rights movement and many other people who were ostracized and attempted to be censored and change the world because they were able to use their words freely and in an uncensored manner. Another sad side effect of the social media digital age and the platforms that are now reaching billions of people is the cancel culture, doxing, and trolling, the collateral damage of such. I'm going to discuss that, and then this program will complete with a story of redemption for someone who was to some degree harmed and canceled after an unfortunate moment and was able to redeem himself. Cancel culture, if you have nothing nice to say nothing at all. Before social media captured us and the internet exposed our worst tendencies and sometimes our genitals for the world to see, people got away with an occasional dirty joke. Even at work, colleges encouraged fierce, ugly, untamed, controversial, and sometimes painful speech as part of our First Amendment right to hold any opinion we wished. Sure, there were occasionally a mob mentality and innocent people were wrongly accused of something, or a minor, forgivable transgression would get blown into a federal offense. But most of the time, we gave people the benefit of the doubt. We turned an oops into a teachable moment. We acknowledged each other's humanity, knowing we all put our foot in our mouth occasionally. Pornography consisted primarily of Playboy and Hustler and a handful of brown paper-covered magazines in the back of the newsstand. Pornographic film was just that, film, often without audio. For most people, traveling to one of those XXX stores was not an option. Many did subscribe to the magazines, but while a picture tells 1,000 words, a video tells 1,000,000. By the time we all began carrying our own private, tiny, yet remarkably high-definition quality portals into every word, picture, and video ever made, oftentimes for free, and sending pictures and video of our genitals became commonplace, are we surprised thousands of preteen and teenage lives have been irrevocably tainted, if not ruined? Thanks to excellent exposés from prominent newspapers and magazines, online porn providers are beginning to take some responsibility for limiting their content to professionals, but many sexually abused and raped folks are reliving their pain for years without recourse. Regardless, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of hardcore pornographic videos that are viewed with impunity and ironically privately by men and women who in some cases lose any ability to enjoy a relationship that doesn't look, sound, and feel like porn. While in education and the job force, women have made great strides in equalizing things with men, porn is the one reason why our popular culture, from music to movies to television to social media, remains stubbornly stuck portraying women as whores and men as their masters. A man's sexual pleasure remains predominant. A strong, dominant woman is rarely seen as sexually desirable to many men in today's popular culture. There are a few, if any, pornos where a man and woman are equally dominant, where they make love in a mutually respectful, permission given along the way manner. Haven't seen a porno in a while where someone gets a Charlie horse and screams, "Wait, get off of me, ow!" or is too drunk to finish, or loses their erection and just says, "I'm done," and pushes you off. We are not far from living our own virtual, believable, real-life porn, but until then, getting overstimulated through videos of messy, smelly, awkward, fetish, and fantasy-oriented sex is only setting us up for disappointment. And recreating your own porn by taping yourself with your partner is great until you break up and in a jealous rage your glaring, thrusting, and gyrating white ass is seen by the world. And consequently, your parents are mortified, your children look at you differently, the principal thinks it may be wise not to teach kindergarten anymore, and to add insult to injury, your current girlfriend posts your ugly limp dick with the caption, "Insufficient funds." The much greater damage, as we suffer through this period between walking pieces of conscious meat and our eventual silicon replicas, is how quickly and intensely social media has inverted the notion of, if you have nothing nice to say, to gladiator levels of Schadenfreude. And this is what is concerning about losing the in-the-flesh existence, that communication we spoke about, that allows for us to see and feel someone's pain or remorse, to hear the sincerity in their voice, to be able to discern snark from sarcasm, from only plain misinterpretation. In short, social media has nearly eliminated the notion of "there but by the grace of God go I." No matter how many times we see people we know, people we love, people we respect, people we would die for, crucified or blown up for misunderstood nonsense in a tweet or a Facebook post or an email, we not only stand by and accept it, we also, be honest, get off on it. We crave it. We scroll for it. We want it. We can't get enough of it. We want people to suffer. Not us, though. Just those other people. We shoot first and ask questions never. Forgiveness comes too late for millions of people who sometimes lose their job, their money, their families, their respect, and their dignity, oftentimes over nothing. Or sometimes over something where the punishment way exceeds the crime. When we leave our materialism and exist in the other, we will not feel mortal pain. We will be able to enjoy others' pain and suffering harmlessly, since nothing will be real. But until then, maybe we can be brave enough to occasionally forgive. And we will start to conclude the Jonathan Moore Schwartz My Manic Brain program on communication, social media, and redemption with the story of a man who did a bad thing and was punished for it and then redeemed himself. It's called The Trailer Park King. He was going to be the world's greatest doctor. He came from modest means, so had to borrow $200,000 to get through medical school. He had a rocky relationship with his longtime girlfriend, and they would scream at each other sometimes at the top of their lungs. They'd break up, they'd get back together. Each breakup slowly destroyed them. It was a death of 1,000 cuts. On the eve of him starting his first job as a full-fledged physician, they had the fight to end all fights. She pushed him. He walked away. She poked her finger into his chest and said, "You are nothing. You are a fool. You are a terrible doctor. I will destroy you if it kills me." She pushed him hard enough for him to lose his balance and fall. He snapped. He ran toward her. She fearlessly ran toward him. He pushed her. She fell backwards, hitting her head on the edge of the coffee table, bleeding but fully conscious. His heart pounded so ferociously he was certain he was going to have a heart attack and die on the spot. She said nothing. Instead, as blood trickled from the back of her head, she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. His life was over. 3 years in jail, the loss of his medical license, and the estrangement of his family. She fully recovered and didn't want him to be punished so severely, but it was out of her hands at that point. He served a little over 2 years in prison and was released on good behavior. While he was in prison, he studied mechanics and the fundamentals of electricity and construction. He knew, despite owing more money in student loans than he could ever repay, he would never practice medicine in any traditional sense. He had already gone through several states of anger, fury, suicidal rage, thoughts of murdering his girlfriend, denial, bargaining, reasoning, moments of forgiveness, and finally, resigned acceptance of his new lot in life. He knew a traditional job was a foolish endeavor, since at least 15% of any paycheck would be sucked away to pay a student loan on a medical degree he would never again formally use. Instead, he knew he had to become a business owner. He had seen plenty of cable news shows about people who had served prison time but were able to achieve success by opening a store, lawn business, restaurant, nightclub, bar, bowling alley, moving company, or service-oriented company. Once released from prison, he was able to rent a dilapidated, leaking, barely standing 40-year-old single-wide trailer in a rundown, largely empty Florida trailer park for $275 a month. This did not include electricity or water, which ended up being a hose and a single electric cord. When a slip of paper was slid under his door informing him he had only 30 days to evacuate the trailer park because it was being closed, he inquired about whether he could purchase it. He had one single relative, a rich uncle, who had been sympathetic to his plight, who agreed to co-sign a loan so he could buy the trailer park and try and turn it around. After having lost it all at the age of 29, he was suddenly given a second chance to succeed. The odds were stacked against him, but he was now the proud owner of a trailer park in such disrepair there were only 6 units being rented in a place where there, in the early 90s, was a safe, cleanable, affordable community with a playground, community center, woodworking shop, country store selling homemade quilts, baked goods, and a mishmash of snacks, tobacco, and RV cabin and tent necessities. But by 1995, druggies and gang members replaced families and travelers, and after several shootings and one death, there was a mass exodus of dozens of family-oriented folks, except a few who were stuck. And little by little, the evildoers either left, overdosed, were arrested, or killed. Suddenly, they were left without the delight of children laughing and playing and family sing-alongs and the wafting deliciousness of slightly burnt hot dogs or the strange sense of security the gangsters afforded, defending their territory, which included them. They were, the ones who remained, a Vietnam vet with lingering PTSD, a disabled daughter in a wheelchair with her cocktail waitress loving, caring mother, a man falsely accused of murder who was beat to within an inch of his life in prison, then released when DNA proved his innocence, a 28-year-old girl who was gang raped at a fraternity party, tried to shoot herself, lived but needed 24-hour oxygen, and lost the use of her right arm and hand, an 82-year-old woman who enjoyed the good years of the park with her late husband and simply couldn't leave, and a 53-year-old man who worked 25 years bagging groceries and was fired when a customer claimed he groped her. He denied it, and despite over 2 decades with a clean record, they fired him. The fate of these lost, lovable, unfortunate misfits was now in his hands, and this humiliated, ruined, lost everything in a cruel twist of fate, unemployed physician adopted these residents of his trailer park. He provided them with free medical care, in some ways becoming their salvation and their reason to keep going. The moment he became the legal owner, he gathered his 6 tenants and made them a deal. If they agreed to help him clean up and rebuild the park, he would give them an ownership percentage, giving them a clear financial incentive and some skin in the game. They were all in and spent several months cleaning and weeding and rebuilding the gazebos and playground and reattaching the electric and septic attachments until the park started to become a safe, beautiful, spiritual environment again. He built a gated security entrance and hired a guard to ensure the rules of the park were enforced and family-friendly. He offered free weekends to lure people in. Little by little, blade of grass by blade, the disgraced imprisoned doctor, the Vietnam vet, the disabled daughter and her mother, the innocent man who did time anyway, the 28-year-old whose innocence was stripped from her by force, the 82-year-old matriarch, and the 53-year-old ruined by a disgruntled customer, rebuilt the trailer park. Suddenly, families would bring their RVs, and the children would swing and sing, and the dad would go fishing, and the moms would create beautiful paintings, and grandma would garden, and grandpa would read a book under the shade of a glorious oak, then grilled chicken and hot dogs and hamburgers for whoever was hungry. And what had become a sad, dangerous, open sewage-smelling monstrosity was transformed, not by a Wall Street-backed investment banker or greedy businessman looking to cater only to the rich, but by an unemployed, disgraced doctor and his team of equally downtrodden misfits who simply created a place where people felt safe, had an enormous variety of enjoyable activities and events to enjoy, were charged a fair price, and were more than just appreciated as customers. They were loved for being part of their journey and guaranteeing the park would prosper. Over a 10-year period, the trailer park grew and through simple word of mouth become one of the most popular in the entire state of Florida. And as the area and the land became a more desirable location for tourists from all around the world, Wall Street investors did indeed eventually come calling. A well-endowed corporation looking to expand into Florida made the doctor an offer. And suddenly his $299,000 investment became a $4 million windfall. He agreed to stay on for an additional 5 years, and he and his gang of original tenants maintained the magic of the experience for thousands of visitors and nearly 50 year-round tenants. Sadly, the 82-year-old, who managed to live long enough to enjoy some of the spoils of her back-breaking work, died at 93, 1 year after the sale. After 5 years passed, the park changed ownership, and they didn't want them to remain. So the doctor paid his original tenants the 5% they earned, which was $2,000 each, totaling $1.2 million. He gave the money of the deceased 93-year-old to her children, and he took the remaining $2.8 million and married the girl who thought she could never love a man after the fraternity rapist stole her soul. And a group of people society had decided were just throwaway trash lived the rest of their lives in reasonable comfort, though they never stopped giving back. While the doctor could never legally practice medicine, he and the remaining original tenants started a nonprofit organization to feed the poor and create the largest regional charity food market in the entire state. They became just rich enough to always be warm in the winter and have enough food to eat, but not wealthy enough to forget where they came from. They were forgiven, but more importantly, instead of seeking revenge or vengeance against those who nearly destroyed them, they placed their energy where it belonged, on creating a better life and world for those around them. They forgave their tormentors and created the life they wished to live. If life is truly just a big game, they won. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Jonathan Morris Schwartz My Manic Brain Sex, Politics, and Everlasting Life program. Oh, what a day it is. Good night, everybody.